Right.
Okay, all
No,
right,
don't say that because it makes me laugh.
that's fine.
You couldn't just crop. Cut.
Huh?
I'll say cut. So cut. Take two. Okay, take two. I'm just gonna sit here. If that's okay.
It's fine,
You're gonna do some comments afterwards, though.
if you want. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started on the review. Are you guys ready? Yeah. Okay.
Get my phone out of here while I'm here. Are you the one that went to Washington?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Heard stories.
It's a great trip, fun had by all.
We heard pencils there.
I don't know if you noticed, but on my extra credit, I didn't know what the answer was.
I know, I gave it to you because it made me laugh.
Did you?
Yes,
Good.
yeah.
I thought it was funny.
So for the test next Tuesday, exam 3, it's going to be over epidemiology and then qualitative. Okay? So I have review sheets for you, and the people that aren't here, I'll put them on Blackboard. So I'll give those to you now. So you can write anything you want on here.
Is it gonna be another open book test?
It is an open book test, open notes. This is my son Leo. He is doing the audio visual for us here, such that it is. Hopefully it's still going. All right, so for the test, I made it a little bit longer so you can miss more. So it's 20 questions. There's one fill in the blank, and there's one extra credit. For epidemiology, let me pull that one up first. This first part is not on there. We've already been tested on that. So it would start here with epidemiological design. So this is the 3 concepts of that epidemiological triangle: the host, environment, and agent. And this slide gives you a little bit more about what each of those is. Any questions on that? Then the difference between prevalence. So prevalence, remember, is describing the number of existing cases of a particular disease in a population. So it's existing number of cases of a disease in a population. So it's people that have had it for a while, people who are newly diagnosed, are all included in that. And you can have point prevalence, which is in a particular time frame, or a period prevalence, which is a longer span of time, so week, month, or year. So it's not just new cases. So if you go down to the incidence slide, incidence is the new cases. So that's the difference. Prevalence is old and new, incidence is just new. And then prevalence can be broken down into period prevalence or point prevalence.
I have on my incident slide, never had to be contracted. Was that something you said?
Never had to be
I have the number of new cases during a specific time, and then never had to be contracted is what I wrote. I don't know why.
Well, it's they've never had it before, it's new.
Okay.
Whereas prevalence would have the older cases as well.
So maybe that's what I meant, never had before. Okay.
Yeah. So then you'll actually look at this slide here. This slide, I gave it to you in the review sheet as well. It's the same slide. This is the same slide that will be on the test. The only thing with the one on the test, it's black and white. So you have the color version now, so you can look at that, or you can pull up this slide. So if we look at this, what particular area is lowest prevalence? And this is for HIV, adults with HIV. Right, lowest prevalence is Western Pacific, so that's the really, really pale yellow.
Or that's 0.1?
Correct.
Okay.
So you see Australia in there, so you do have to kind of know your countries. Australia's there, also part of China, or really most of China is there. Then the one that has the most would be part of Africa. So like South Africa, you don't really need to know any other African countries. And then the Americas is 0.5. So see, Africa is 4.6, so it's really up there, whereas America's the next one at 0.5. So that's all of Americas, so that's Canada, United States, Mexico, and then all of the countries in South America. So you would just have to pick out, like I would say, which country out of these four has the most prevalence of adult HIV between the ages of 15 and 49 years old. And if I said South Africa, that would be the one. Okay. And then you'd have to calculate it by percent. So if you remember for prevalence, calculating it, I'm just going to have you calculate the percent because that's the easiest. So it's the number of people ill divided by the total number in the group. And then to get a percent, you would times it by 100. So if I give an example,
Wait, is it 100,000?
for a percentage, it's 100.
Okay.
So let's say there is 350 that have the disease. So have it, add it, newly diagnosed, and the population is 22,150 people. So you divide these, multiply by 100 for a percentage, and what would we get? Can anyone do that on their phone real quick?
I don't think I did it right.
So 350. What did you get? 1.6%?
Oh
Okay.
yeah, 1.58.
So 1.6% is the prevalence. When you see journals, you'll see it reported out as per 100,000 people. And that's not a percent, that's just based on 100,000. I think the percentage is easier to do.
And you said open book, open note, so does this count?
Yep.
Okay.
So remember, so if we said the prevalence is going to be 0.016 then, right? And then this is the percentage. Okay. Does that make sense to you? All right. Then we have to calculate the incidence.
And you'll want it written both ways.
No. On the test, I actually give you numbers, so you're just picking A, B, C, or D.
Okay. So if you know your numbers.
I think
okay,
there is,
try again.
let me double check, there's one fill in the blank that is math, but that is an odds ratio.
Okay.
But prevalence and incidence are multiple choice. So then for incidence, it's basically the same thing, except you're going to have just new cases. So I'm going to tell you they're new cases. So it's exactly the same way to calculate it. New cases over the total number of people. And I'm going to tell you which one it is. So you don't have to say, this is prevalence or incidence. I'm going to tell you. Calculate the prevalence or calculate the incidence. And I'll say new cases. I'm not making you choose one or the other. I'm telling you which one to calculate, okay? Then this slide is where it says the difference between descriptive and analytical studies. It's right here. Descriptive is answering who, what, when, where, whereas analytic is answering why and how. Descriptive, the purpose is to identify subpopulations at risk, whereas the analytic is identifying determinants of disease. Hypotheses are generated in descriptive, whereas analytic, you are testing hypotheses. And description has no comparison group, analytic does. And remember, only experimental design has a control group. So you can't have comparison groups in analytic. Only experimental randomized control trials has a control group. Otherwise, it's a comparison group, or there's no group, no comparison at all, as in descriptive. So, you remember those Punnett squares?
Mm-hmm.
So this is how they set up the Punnett square. So if they have a disease and they were exposed, they go into box A. If they don't have the disease but they were exposed, they go into box B. They have the disease not exposed, goes into box C. No disease, not exposed, goes into box D. So you will have a question where I tell you numbers for each. So I would say, I'm just going to make up one here. We're going to, let's see. I just ate some gummy bears, so that's what's on my mind. So I'm going to say, we're looking at people who eat gummy bears. They have more trouble with constipation. That'd be a fun one to do, wouldn't it? We have our box here. So if I said 56 people who eat gummy bears have constipation. 111 people who eat gummy bears do not have constipation. 26 people who do not eat bears have constipation. And 150 people who do not eat gummy bears do not have constipation. So what goes in box A?
56.
56. So they're the ones that eat the bears and have the constipation. So they're exposed and they have the disease. So what goes in box B? 111. So they're exposed but they do not have the disease. What goes in box C?
26.
they're not exposed, but they have the disease. And what goes in D? 150. So you would just be telling me that. So I would give you this, and I say, what's in box C? What number goes to box C? So you would tell me that. Okay? Then we're going to go ahead. The next one is calculating the odds ratio.
Is that under the case? Yeah.
So the odds ratio, or OR, is AD over BC, right? So A is what?
56.
56 times
150.
150 divided by
111
times 26.
times 26. So what number do we come up with?
56 times 150 is 8,400 over
8,400.
over 2886. It comes to 2.91.
So 2.91. So 2.91. So that's what you'd put in the blank, 2.91. And now we have to interpret this. So how would you interpret it?
There's a greater probability of disease.
Right, so there's a greater probability that people who eat gummy bears will have constipation. Now, is it saying that people who eat gummy bear get constipation?
No.
No, it's not a cause and effect. There's just a correlation or association, increased probability of that occurring.
Greater probability that people who eat.
Okay? Any questions on the odds ratio, how to calculate it, what to put into the Punnett square? No? Pretty
So
straightforward?
you just said people who eat gummy bears are at greater risk of getting them.
Correct.
Okay.
Right, it doesn't mean that they will. It doesn't mean that the gummy bears cause the constipation. There's just some association there. So then, the statistics are for the case control test, or the case control study, you're gonna do an odds ratio. Whereas if you do a cohort study, it's a relative risk.
Say that again.
Case control is an odds ratio statistic. Cohort study is a relative risk. I do not ask you how to calculate relative risk nor interpret relative risk. It's really the same interpretation as odds ratio. The equation's a little different though. Setting up the Punnett square is the same.
So we just have, for that question, you just have to know the difference. What goes to what.
Right,
Okay.
right. And I think, let me have the test right here so I can make sure that I'm telling you the correct.
You can feel free to share it with us now.
Yeah.
What?
we can get the PDF copy of that right now.
Well, if you don't pass the test, if I gave you the PDF, I would be very sad.
Just take it as a group right now.
Yeah, we
There you
could.
go.
We can film the whole
First, I go into
minute.
the actual comments.
We can turn off the recording.
So for the case control, let's go. So case control is a retrospective study. So in the question, it's not going to tell you exactly what kind of study, but it's going to say case control retrospective where cohort is prospective. So it's going to say whether you looked back in time. So if you're looking back in time, that's a case control study. If you're looking forward or into the future, that's a cohort study. So that's your key word there in the question.
So back in time, you can go.
Right. So if you're looking forward, let's say,
So
I
give us
say-
an example of it.
so if I said this town was exposed to lead in the pipes, and they want to know, did that cause any brain damage in children in a certain age group?
Back in time.
So they're looking back in time because they were exposed before, and we're looking now to see is there any issue with that. If I said a new pesticide is being used, but it hasn't really been tested on what it does to people, let's say fetuses, does it cause any birth defects?
So it would be future.
We're looking future, because we just started the chemical, we're gonna look into the future. Okay, so cohorts in the future, case controls in the past. All right. Chi-squared. So remember, chi-squared is basically looking to see are they similar or are they different? And this is for nominal data. So like colors, it's like I used the example of M&Ms. If you have, I don't know, what's all the colors of M&Ms? Leo, do you know
Red,
what?
blue, green, yellow, brown.
Or brown.
Yeah.
We still have brown? We
Yes.
still have brown, we didn't get rid of brown?
Nope. It's
Brown's
still there.
So brown,
Green.
green, the famous green ones.
Red, yellow.
Red, yellow, blue,
Orange.
then orange?
Yeah.
Orange. Any other colors? All right, so we're just, if you have this nominal data where you can't measure it with a ruler, or you can't measure it with any particular tool, that's the kind of data you're gonna use for the chi-squared. So when you're reporting out chi-squared, we report the degrees of freedom. So the degrees of freedom is all of these colors, the number of these colors minus 1. So we have 6 colors, so 6 minus 1 equals 5. That's how many degrees of freedom. So if I was an M&M and I was brown, how many other colors could I be? 5. There's 5 other colors. So that's what that means. Okay? So degree of freedom is the categories that you have minus 1. And then you will get a number, which is the chi-squared number, which doesn't mean a whole lot, but it will say like 2.6 is the chi-squared. And then your confidence interval, your CI, it might say 2.3 to 2.9, which is a very narrow confidence for this. So you can guess your p-value is going to be less than 0.05. And if it's less than 0.05, what does that mean? Is this number?
Significant.
It's a significant number. Significant. So there's a significant difference. So let's say we have 3 brown M&Ms, 6 green, 24 red, 30 yellow, 1 blue, and 2 orange. If we do all of these, there's a significant difference between each of these, is what it's telling you. Which you could probably see, but that's what this number means.
Okay, do we need to know all of that? Or
You need to
what
know
is
what the
key?
degrees of freedom is. So if I say there's 7 categories, what would you expect the degrees of freedom to be? 6. This, you don't really need to know. This is helpful, but you don't really need to know. But this you need to know. If it's less than 0.05, it's significant. So if I give you a number and I say, this is what it read out.
You're giving us the p-value and we're determining what.
Yes.
Okay.
So the question will be like this. You read these statistics. Your degrees of freedom is 13. Your chi-square is 3.12. Your confidence interval is 3.09 to 3.28. Your p-value is less than 0.0004. So I would say, how many categories are in this study?
Can you read that out loud? I can't see it.
Degrees of freedom is 13.
No, just the p-value part.
P-value is 0.0004.
Okay.
So if I said, how many categories? 14. Is the finding significant?
It is significant.
It's significant.
Yes.
So you would just be interpreting this. All right. Any questions on the chi-square? That's it for this lecture.
So statistics, this lecture isn't on there.
Statistics is on the final. Right. So qualitative then. There are not a lot of questions on qualitative. So, if I said, what kind of study has a comparison group? What kind of study has a comparison group? Mhm.
Comparison group. Wait.
What kind of study has a comparison group?
Oh, qualitative.
No?
Experimental.
Right, or analytical.
Oh.
Analytical. What experiment has a control group?
Comparison. No, the
A control.
experimental has the control.
Experimental. Experimental has a control group. What kind of study has no comparison or no control group?
So, no, wait, say that again.
No control group, no comparison group. Remember what it was called? Descriptive. Descriptive has no comparison group, no control group. And a descriptive study can be qualitative. So qualitative studies do not have a comparison group or a control group.
And then which one has the comparison?
Comparison is an analytical or quasi-experimental. It's the door locking.
And then experiment.
It's annoying. It happens at 6 o'clock.
So experiment.
And then the guy will come through and say, oh, you have class? Well, we've had class all summer, but you can't.
You think you figured out.
Yeah, we're almost done and he might figure out that we have class.
Okay, wait, can you look to see if I wrote this right? Because I'm confused.
So analytical, quasi-experimental, yes, comparison. Experimental control, descriptive, neither one.
Okay, correct.
All right. And then I give you a few different kinds of tests, but really this is the only one you need to know, the pre and the post. Do you remember when we went over all those internal, or those threats to internal validity? Remember all that? So that's basically your disadvantage. So Your disadvantage for this particular one is mortality, so people would drop out. You give them the pre-test, but they don't come back for the post-test. Or the testing, so they see the pre-test, and that gives them hints as to what the post-test answers would be. So those would be the disadvantages. So non-experimental, we talk about the correlational design. And the correlational design is basically just saying two things are correlated, but it doesn't mean one causes the other. You will see this all the time in, like, I don't know if you guys get any of those emails where they kind of update you on the latest research out there, and they'll say, I get a lot for OB, and it'll say, like, if pregnant women get up before 5 a.m., you're more likely to have kids with, I'm making this up, more likely to have kids with 6 arms, or something like that. And it doesn't mean one causes the other, there's just a correlation there. So when you have a correlation, you have, oh, it's like all these different colors in this marker. I'm getting all excited here. You didn't see that one. So the correlation, you have the Y and X. And remember when I showed you that one about, your age and when you go to bed? Okay? So if your correlation and you have a line like this, it means as this one increases, this increases. So there's a positive correlation. So if we set age and bedtime, I'm going to say early bedtime. So the older you are, the sooner you go to bed. As Leo can attest to in our house, right?
Uh-huh.
Yep. What time's your bedtime, Leo? Like 2 a.m., something like that?
No, 11 p.m., Mom.
Yeah, right.
But I mean, I disagree with that, because college makes us stay up later.
Well, wait till you get to my age, though. Not your bedtime, yeah.
5 p.m. It's your bedtime now?
Before we
I
were
wish.
fortunate?
I wish.
It's so sad.
I wish. I don't know, I usually crawl into bed and then watch TV. But anyways, how do we get on my personal life here? Okay. Oh, let's say there's a negative correlation. So then you would see this. So a negative correlation means the older you get, the later the bedtime. But it doesn't mean that your age causes your bedtime. There's no cause and effect, it's just a correlation. Does that make sense? So I can't say everybody, as they get older, they're gonna go to bed earlier. I'm just saying that there is an association there, but your age doesn't cause the bedtime. So you understand how to interpret that. So for the test, I'll give you a picture like this picture, and then I'll say, y equals this, x equals this, and then how are they associated? Okay?
Meaning, is it a positive or a negative?
No, it'll say, so if we went back to the bedtime and I had this, I would say one answer is age causes an early bedtime. No, there's no cause and effect, we don't know. You say there is association with increased age, you are more likely to go to bed early. Yes. Increased age, you're more likely to go to bed later. No, that would be this way. Or I'd say something like, you can't tell by this picture what it means, but obviously you can. Okay?
Okay.
All right. So for correlational tests like this, you'll get a number. And they're called all different kinds of things. There's the Spearman coefficient, the Pearson coefficient, the rho, there's a whole bunch of them. And they all basically are the same, it's just different statistics. So if you get a number, and let's say your number is 0.8, slide down here. And I say, the number you got, the coefficient, the correlational coefficient is 0.8. What does that tell you about this?
It's a strong correlation.
Strong correlation, right. If I said it was 0.2,
It's an
Weak
okay
one.
correlation.
it's a weak one, right. Okay?
So wait, that's, 1.0.1.
So if it was like 0.3, it'd be a moderate correlation.
Right,
Okay.
right.
So greater than.
The one on the test is very obvious which one it is.
Oh.
Yeah. If it's a negative number, then it's a negative correlation, so the line goes this way. All right? So it's still a strong correlation.
So the numbers stay the same even if it's negative. So if it's negative.
Right, if it's negative, it's just telling you your line goes this way, but it's still a strong association, 0.8. If you look at just this part, it's still a strong negative correlation. And 0 is just a straight line, like this. So then there's no correlation. Then types of none. So then the experimental designs, you have your correlational designs, but you also have the methodological design. And this is just doing a study to see if an instrument is valid and reliable.
That's methodological.
Mm-hmm. And then meta-analysis is where you're taking the information from every other study about your particular concept, and you're synthesizing that using a set rule. So you're using information from other studies. You're not conducting a new study, you're just bringing in everybody else's studies. And then for qualitative, basically, there's just the 4 designs. And I gave you a lot of information on the 4 different designs. So this phenomenology is about lived experience, grounded theory is about a process of social behavior, ethnography is about culture, and historical is just looking at the history. That's really the only thing you need to know on those.
So, question, for your number 15, the types of non-experimental designs, are we just talking about
We're talking about the ones I just went over,
the
so it would be like,
correlation and then the other 2?
right.
Okay.
And then the qualitative are the other 4.
That are listed.
Right. And then categorizing it by length of time is kind of going over it again. So if you're looking back, that's your case control study, that's a retrospective design. Cross-sectional means you're just looking at one particular time period, that's it. So you're not going forward or back, you're just looking at that one particular time. And then longitudinal is forward, looking into the future, which would be your cohort. Cross-sectional is also a cohort design too. But you don't need to know that for the test.
So you said case control is retrospective, what was that?
Cross-sectional is a cohort.
So cross-sectional
You're
is
looking at one particular time
one
period.
particular.
You're not looking forward or back, just that particular time. And longitudinal is forward, looking forward into the future, and that's a cohort study. All right. Any questions about anything for the test? No? Any questions about your projects? No? Doing all right with those? Okay.
Are we taking the test first and then we're gonna, present on it?
Yeah, we can do that.
Or,
Get the worst over with.
Yeah.
I agree.
For the project, is it using what we did in the grid and
Mhm.
basically collecting it all, analyzing it, and putting it on the board? Is that correct?
Right, right. You're having the different sections on the, did you look at this one?
Yeah, I did. I'm just,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
I'm
you-
trying to process in my head how I'm getting the grid to the board. So it's just reviewing each study.
Yeah, you don't have to review each study on here.
Mhm.
You're kind of just giving us a synopsis of that. So you have your PCOT question that you came up with,
Okay,
and then your evidence summary, like what you found.
okay,
And then, what your, policy is, or whether you're not going to have a policy, if you couldn't find enough information, or it wasn't supported.
okay.
And to confirm, you said there was that stuff about turning in the grid. If we haven't made any changes to our grid since the original turn-in, we don't have to turn in
No.
another one. Okay.
Nope, it's the same, nope.
Oh, we should have the references on the board.
Yeah, that, just in case somebody wants to look something up,
Okay.
yeah.
Would you have told us if our PCAT question was like crap?
Will I
look at
tell
them?
you?
No, did you, like, would you tell us, cause I mean, we've already turned those in, right?
Mm-hmm,
So did you, have you looked at them?
mm-hmm.
Like, were they appropriate or should
Yeah,
I
they're
change
fine.
them? Okay.
Yeah.
So if something was wrong, you would have told us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was better with the words. I remember.
It's okay, I feel it. Well, what's going on with the Wi-Fi
Yeah.
lately?
I have an obsessed too.
I don't know.
It keeps taking us off secure and putting it on Velcro net, and then you have to go in and like select it.
I think there was something about updating that, you had to update it.
They updated my computer, I went to IT and they did it, and like last Monday it started, when we were all in practicum, everybody was having trouble getting on. I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
Question,
Yes,
will you give us an opportunity for extra credit?
if you need it,
I need it,
you do?
I do.
All right,
I got an
Me
80
too.
on my last exam, I need it.
all right. Are you passing?
I'm passing, but not with an A.
Me
You
too,
don't
I
need
need
an
it.
A?
Is coming to class today actually kind of
Yeah.
Oh.
We get a point of
Well,
extra credit.
it is credit for a discussion board, you don't have to do a discussion board this week.
But what about the people that didn't show up?
Well, they have to watch it.
That's true. Okay, question for you, our appraisal of the qualitative research from the summary grid, those aren't graded yet, are those meant to be like grade boosters?
I haven't graded the, agree yet. I should have, the agree that,
Oh, that's
yeah,
the appraisal, okay.
yeah.
exciting.
That one, if you did it, you'll get 100.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then
The
summary
other
grade-
one is part of your other grade, your total grade for your project.
Okay, so if I'm like running my numbers, don't count the summary grid as points because it's part of the other thing, right?
Right.
Okay.
Alright. Well, that's it. So then next week we'll have the presentations, the exam, and then, study for final.
Exam first though?
Yeah,
Exam first, and you'll give us the extra credit assignment.
if you need it, but that's only if you're not passing the class. I don't give extra credit to boost
And
you
then
to the.
for online participation,
But I don't think you're doing that bad.
I got a C on an exam.
You're
Oh,
doing
wow.
fine. You're doing fine. One exam is so small in this class, though. Well, yeah, 'cause you have a lot of other stuff to bring you on. Exams are only what? Is it even 6?
5%,
How much?
isn't it 25% the total?
I don't know, that
No, it's
first
more than
exam
that.
that I didn't do so hot on killed my grade.
Me too. Should we use a little extra credit boost from the first
You
one?
can.
The first test was wrong.
And then for the online
First test was wrong.
I did better on the
rough.
first
Oh,
test
rough.
than I did the second.
So exams are what, 65% of the class. So you still have 35% of that out there hanging.
Those don't sound like good odds.
Well, that's not what nursing courses are. Nursing
Yeah,
courses are 80.
Nursing courses, like I'm happy that it's not the nursing grading scale.
Yeah, nursing courses are 80%.
Well, it's still the nursing grading scale, it's just not
Exactly.
weighted as normal, right?
Yes, it is.
It's the same. It's the grading scale for the
But
college.
tests, like tests are worth 80% normally in nursing,
Yeah.
it's only 65.
Yeah, nursing courses normally it's 80.
Yeah.
This class, if you took it as an undergrad, it's 80, isn't it? Is it 80?
I don't know, cause I didn't even get to take it because of the whole issue I had.
I think it's 80. So.
Now, for the online participation, as long as we've done all the discussion boards, it's just counted as 100%. I have a good app that you can put you put the syllabus in, and then you put your numbers in, and you can put your target grade. It tells you what you have to get on every day to hit your target.
I don't wanna know.
Yeah, I don't wanna know, that would give me so much anxiety.
See, that stops my anxiety, so I have to do it.
All you have to do is take your score times the percent, and that would
Because
do
I
it.
was stalking Blackboard after that last exam.
So like if you got an 80 on the first test, and it's 50.
No, I actually got a, I think
I got a
I
55
got a-
on the first.
I got a 90 on the first one and an 80 on the
8
oldest one.
times 0.15 gives you a number, and then you add all your numbers together, they should come up to 100%.
You tried to show me that, and it was so confusing, and I
I'm
found
sorry.
it, and it was like wonderful.
Well, if there's an app, sure, that's way easier.
Yeah,
to
you
it on
just really put in
paper.
your syllabus and how much everything's worth, and then you can put your target grade in the class, and then it'll tell you what you need to get on each assignment to get your target grade, and then as assignments
Really?
are graded, you fill them in.
Cause like the exams, like the exam 1, 2, and 3, those are worth 15 points each,
Right.
right? 60 times 100. So at 80, that's 12. So that's almost 3.
Yeah. I'm math specialist, so I had to take 4 math classes before I even got to college math.
All right, I'm gonna stop recording because I think
So
we're